The wind howled through the wide-open plains that night, rattling the shutters of the sprawling ranch house. Inside, silence settled over the dimly lit parlor where the richest rancher in the county lay, stretched across a leather chair, eyes closed as though in slumber. But he was not truly asleep. Behind those closed lids, his mind burned with suspicion, curiosity, and a strange hunger for truth. Too many people in his world had smiled at him only for his money, bowed to him for his power, and betrayed him when they thought he wasn't looking. Now, faced with a poor widow who had come under his roof seeking nothing more than a day's work and a meal, he found himself restless with doubt. Was she genuine or like all the others? So he pretended to sleep, waiting to see what she would do when she thought he wasn't watching. If you believe in kindness, honesty, and second chances, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to The Gentle Truth. Stories like this deserve to be told, and your support keeps them alive. The widow, worn and tired from a life of hardship, moved quietly through the room. Her hands were cracked from scrubbing floors and washing clothes, her face lined with shadows of sorrow. She had lost everything. Her husband to a fever that swept the valley, her home to debts she could not pay, her hope to the cruel whispers of neighbors who said she was cursed. When the rancher had allowed her to work in his home for a few weeks, she hadn't dared to hope for more than enough bread to feed her children. Now, as she passed the chair where he feigned sleep, she hesitated. The firelight flickered across his strong features, and for the first time she saw not a wealthy landowner, but a man, lonely, guarded, and burdened by his own unseen wounds. She could have stolen something. The silver on the mantel gleamed within her reach. The gold watch on the side table could have been hidden in her apron. He had left it all exposed, as though daring fate. Instead, she bent down slowly, lifted the blanket that had slipped from his shoulder, and tucked it carefully back across his chest. Her fingers lingered for a moment in the air, not daring to touch, yet betraying the tenderness she carried inside. Then she moved away, took the smallest piece of bread from the kitchen rather than the larger loaf, and quietly prepared a plate to bring to her children sleeping in the barn. The rancher's heart froze in his chest. He had expected greed, or at least resentment. He had expected her to pocket something, to curse him under her breath, to prove his suspicions true. Instead, he saw sacrifice, humility, and a love that reached beyond her own hunger. When she returned, she sat at the far side of the hearth, knees pulled to her chest, watching the flames dance. She thought she was alone with her thoughts, unaware that he had seen every motion, every choice. The days that followed tested them both. Whispers spread among the ranch hands. What business did a poor widow have in the house of a man like him? Was she scheming? Was she hunting for a new husband? The widow bore the gossip with quiet strength, never defending herself, never lowering her gaze. She worked tirelessly, mending clothes with thread too short, cooking meals from scraps, and still saving the best for her children. Every night, the rancher pretended once more to rest in his chair or by the fire, and every night he saw her repeat small acts of kindness that no one else would ever have known. She swept not only the floors, but the corners where dust hid. She patched his torn gloves so carefully that he wondered if she realized he noticed. And more than once, when she thought no one was near, she wept silently into the worn hem of her dress, tears slipping like prayers into the earth. One evening, a storm rolled across the plains, fierce and wild. Lightning cracked the skies, and the barn roof shuddered under the weight of the wind. When a frightened colt broke loose, the rancher rushed out with his men, only to return hours later, drenched and weary. Inside, he found the widow rocking his youngest Han's child, whose mother had left years before, against her chest, singing softly. Her voice was low, steady, and filled with a love so deep it made the walls of the great house seem suddenly small. The boy's sobs faded, his breathing evened, and he clung to her as though he had always belonged in her arms. That night, the rancher could no longer keep his silence. He sat across from her at the fire, the boy asleep in her lap, and for once he allowed himself to speak from the raw place inside that wealth and pride had never healed. He admitted he had doubted her, tested her, even hoped she would prove unworthy so he could protect his heart with bitterness. But she had not. Instead, she had reminded him of what he had long forgotten, that true worth is not measured in gold, but in compassion. The widow lowered her gaze, ashamed of the tears that spilled unbidden. She confessed she had nothing to offer, no dowry, no fine clothes, no future except her children and her will to keep them alive. Yet the rancher saw in that moment that she had already given more than anyone ever had. She had given him trust, even when he offered none. She had given his home warmth, even when hers had been taken from her. She had given without knowing she was being watched. In the weeks that followed, the rancher's heart softened like spring thaw after a cruel winter. He began to share meals with the widow and her children, to listen when she spoke of small joys and struggles, to notice the light in her eyes when she laughed despite the weight she carried. The people in town whispered still, but now their voices held curiosity rather than scorn. Could it be that the richest man had finally found something he could not buy? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the fields in gold, the rancher placed his hand over hers and asked her to stay, not as a servant, not as a guest, but as the heart of his home. The widow trembled, torn between fear and hope. But when her children's eyes lit with joy, she knew the answer had already been written by every small act of love that had passed unseen. The rancher had pretended to sleep to test her, but in truth it was she who had awakened him. He had seen the power of quiet goodness, the kind of strength that does not shout but endures. And in that truth he found peace. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to The Gentle Truth. Your support keeps these stories alive, and it means more than words can say. Special request: share in the comments what part of the story moved you most. Your words inspire others too.